Hello and welcome back to Vision Labs. Today we'll be taking a bit of a detour from deck building and stepping into the classroom for the breakdown of the decks from set 1 of OverDress using a format that we all know and love, a tier list. Buckle up, put down those pitchforks, because class is in session. This is one of my favorite devices to stir up some discussion and making people a little bit angry. As you can see here, we do have the 5 categories here: best decks, contenders, playable, meh, don't play. These are generally self-explanatory, but overall, these are going to be the best decks in the format. These are going to be decks that are good, that you can you will see take up about maybe 2, 3, possibly 4 slots in top 8. Playable, you will generally see 1 to 3 spots in top 8. Meh, you can see sometimes in top 8. Generally, you won't in the higher level competitive events. Obviously, locals, vision events, and some small online events. You can pretty much take almost anything here except for the decks that don't play, and you should be able to be fine. So don't come at me in the comments with your locals top, saying to me, oh, you're decking meh top locals. I don't care. I don't care. So from there, we will start with, in my opinion, the worst deck in the format, which is Prison. This deck just gets walled by 4, maybe 5 decks completely. They printed like 3 or 4 cards that can't be targeted, which basically ruins this entire deck's gameplay. It's rough. It's pretty bad design. Just in general, the only way, in my opinion, that this deck or this archetype in general can be played is being played in tandem with Orifice. But pure, I think it's not worth playing at all. Let's go to Zorga here. Nani? I think it's a contender. It has extremely good early game, similar to Magnolia. Stoic in general has a very good early game. Especially with cards like Irena, as well as the Zorga Ride Chain to get a nice +1 and just get your drop zone rolling. It is a 3 attack deck. In my opinion, that's the only reason it's not in best decks. It hits huge numbers. It's hyper consistent. Its drop zone is literally a second hand with all of the orders that you can use with it. I think it just takes the right touch with this deck, and it can easily be one of the best decks in the format. Let's go to Hex. Normally people would say it's up here in this area. Personally, I don't think it's that good. I think it is very reliant on hitting the overtrigger. Yes, when it hits the overtrigger, the power level skyrockets to, honestly, in this tier, because hitting the key to overtrigger and then going +6, +8 off the restander is just insane. I'm putting this here mostly because the games where you do not hit the overtrigger or you do not see Persona Ride are extremely bad. I think it's very, very overhyped. I wouldn't take it to an event. You can take it to an event, do okay, depending on the amount of time you hit the overtrigger, but I think it's very inconsistent at this time. I do think it needs some more stuff. Orifice, it's decent. I think it's more consistent than Hex. It's one of the most consistent decks in the game, in my opinion. I just don't think it's enough right now. It hits decent numbers, has a decent early game. I just don't think it has that finishing combo or finishing set of cards to really push for game on a consistent basis. Bruce, one of everyone's favorite decks, also one of my favorite decks. Putting it up in one of the best decks right now. Its turn 4 is pretty much unmatched right now. The rush potential it has with Gun is super good. It makes up for the lack of early game on turn 3. Gets you some cards back early. I really like this deck. I think it's one of the best choices in the meta right now. Eugene, there's just not enough. There's just not enough there in the deck right now. The actual Eugene card, fairly good. Get some good power. Hitting 23 consistently on turn 3 is usually very good. Right now, its regards are kind of lacking a lot. The Tachikaze card that gives a crit to Vanguard, that's good. I don't love that you lose it at the end of the battle. I do see a lot of potential in Eugene. I do think it can go up to playable or contender in the next few sets, but I do think it needs better rear guards and a better payoff at this time. Irena, I think it's solidly in contenders right now. Opening Arcus on turn 2, it's just good. Drawing 2 is very good, and going into possibly one of the most consistently good turn 3s in the game, probably besides Bastion, is very, very nice. It hits very good numbers. It has a lot of recursion with getting Trickstar back. Overall, I think it's just a very solid starting deck right now. I do think it might be at its ceiling right now, depending on other Irenas, and it does have the multi-attack potential right now. With the new Irena getting 4 attacks is very nice. I just think the potential of this deck is probably at its peak right now. Barrow, I think, is a playable deck. I definitely think people are overhyping it based off of locals tops in Japan. Personally, I'm not a huge fan. I think the hand advantage is a huge issue with this deck. Generally, going to 10 or 15 soul on turn 3 is going to leave you with less cards in hand, unless you're getting very lucky. I like it. I think it's a decent deck. I think it can be a very good deck in the future. I just think it needs better cards right now, except just running a multitude of just on play soul charge 2s or just soul charge 2s, like they're playing 3 or 4 of the soul charge 2 order, Brothers Souls. It just doesn't do anything else other than that, so it's a dead card in your hand most of the game. I don't know. I think the defense is really bad in this deck, but I do think the offensive potential of getting to 10/15 soul on turn 3 heavily outweighs the decks below it, and it can absolutely beat up the decks above it. Not much else to say. Once it gets better hand advantage and more than one decent attacker in Sonicer, it could possibly go up. Magnolia, I think it's pretty much in the same boat as Barrow. I think the ceiling of this deck is very strong. I think the ceiling can absolutely compete with all of the decks above it. It can absolutely take games from all the decks above it. The lore roll games are when you're feeling pretty bad, especially when you're using the trial deck ride chain. Hitting those triggers off of the top does feel pretty bad, although some decks do use Ghost Chase, which I think should be used, but I also think that the correct ride chain for this deck is the Zorga ride chain, and adding in Condensation and Ghost Chase to get a nice +1 early. Generally, I do love this deck. It's one of my favorites to play right now. Like I said, there's a lot of different attack lines that you can do with this deck. Very fun, very interesting to play, and it did get a huge boost with that 15k grade 1 that Soike got. Very nice to just chuck in the back row, and then their triple rare to just pretty much guarantee two attacks hitting over damage triggers. Very nice. I do think some more recursion with this deck would be nice. Some more sticky cards on the board would feel very good with this deck. Definitely, I think it has a potential to move up. But right now, I'm going to stick it solidly in playable because it can absolutely take games above it, but the low roll games are just pretty rough. And now coming to Bastion, I think this is the best deck in the format currently. I think it's a very simple. It's a very drop your cards on the table and go deck, but I don't think it needs to be anything else. It has so many weapons. It has so many options. It just has so many cards that it can play that really just take over the game. It's also like I believe it's the only deck that can attack 5 times, other than Bruce on turn 3. I think it's the only deck that can attack 6 times on turn 3, I think Hexa can do it, but it's much harder than Bastion doing it. And all Bastion has to do is check a trigger and a grade 3, which generally isn't hard since over half their deck is grade 3s, and then the other half is triggers and grade 1s. So it's fairly likely to do it, and even if you don't hit a trigger, you're almost guaranteed to hit a grade 3 every turn and get the 4 attacks off, and the power on this deck is insane. It does have a little bit of an issue with getting rushed, with getting board wiped, but generally, if you can live to turn 3 on fairly low damage, this deck pretty much takes over the rest of the game. And it's very simple tier list. Discuss in the comments, discuss in the community page down there. Like I said, this is my tier list. This is based off how I have played, how I have seen the decks being played. Don't come at me with Hex is too low. Don't come at me with Orifice is too low or Barrow is too low. I don't care. Now, this is VB Franz signing out. Hope to see you guys again soon in the lab.